Hello, it's a frosty morning and we're off to London to do some mudlarking and to see if we can explore the site of London's Lost Castle. Okay, we've reached London. I'm standing on the Millennium Bridge and we're looking behind me at the north bank of the River Thames where we'll be doing some mudlarking. And we'll be looking along the foreshore near the site of two buildings that shared the same name, one a castle and the other a royal palace, both of which have now disappeared apart from their foundations, which were excavated around the 1970s. And the name of those two buildings was Castle Bayard. So let's just get our location and get orientated where we are. We're on the Millennium Bridge, as I said, and ahead of us is St Paul's. And if we pan round across the river, then we've got the Bankside Museum of Modern Art on the south bank there. But really our focus is this area. We've got Blackfriars rail bridge there to our left. And on the foreshore between the Blackfriars rail bridge and where we are, the Millennium Bridge, nearer the Blackfriars bridge, was the site of Castle Bayard. First a Norman castle, and latterly a little nearer to where we are and a little nearer to the current foreshore, the Royal Palace, also called Castle Bayard. It's a very interesting site. This part of London formed the western edge of the Roman city, and also the River Fleet formed that boundary, and that flowed as quite an open river until the 18th century, and then in the 19th century it was covered over as now nothing more than a drain. But that was the barrier, the edge, the frontier, if you like, of the Roman city, the western boundary, and also the corner of the Roman wall. And along the front of the river, in the early 4th century, was constructed the Roman riverside wall. And when the archaeologists excavated this, they found reused in it a lot of sculpted stones and blocks, and these formed part of a triumphal arch which stood behind the riverbank somewhere, and dated from the early 3rd century. And I'll show you some pictures of a reconstruction of that. Bayard's castle was built soon after the Norman conquest in the 11th century by a knight called Bayard, and was demolished by King John in 1213. The name was transferred to a medieval palace built slightly to the southeast. As we'll see later, the foreshore has been reclaimed, so the Roman riverfront was well back from the current embankment that we see today. We'll have a look at that later. And over the centuries, land was reclaimed. So Bayard's castle, the Royal Palace, was built about 1300 and slightly to the southeast of the original Norman castle. The site was used by nobles and by royalty, and Edward IV and Queen Mary I were crowned at the castle. Henry VII also used it as a royal palace. The building survived until it was gutted in the Great Fire of 1666, although some walls remained standing until the 19th century. The site was then used for wharves. Prints show the walls of the building rising right from the Thames, so it really was a riverfront property. And there was a jetty for boats and a riverside gate. But the plan is to go down to the foreshore. The tide is still going out, and we'll see if we can find some artefacts or pottery which date from the medieval period or the period of the royal palace. The better known castle at the other end of the Roman city, you can just see in the distance. There is Tower Bridge, opposite the Tower of London, which is another Norman castle at the other corner of the Roman city, which obviously still survives today. Here we are on the foreshore underneath the Millennium Bridge, and I'll just pan the camera around and look at the foreshore so you can get an idea of what it looks like. Basically, we're walking over a mass of tile and brick, pottery, remains of pipes. Here we have remains of clay pipes there, and roof tile with nail hole in it, bits of old pottery. So we'll have a look, see what we can find. Just met up with London Mudlark, and she very kindly gave me a bit of Roman flagon neck there, just the handle there, because I didn't have one, I haven't found one, so that's very kind of her, share her finds. So see what we can find, turn up then. Just noticed down here a nice bit of creamware plate made in Wedgwood from about 1760 to about 1800. It's quite a nice decorated piece there. Just nestled here between these rocks, got a nice bit of German stoneware, the rosette with nice leaf pattern from a jug. So that's quite a pretty decorative piece. That would be 17th century. It's not at all unusual to find bones on the foreshore. In olden days, butchery was done by the riverside, and they would have thrown the waste straight into the river, so there's plenty of bones. Sometimes you find worked bone or handles as well, or bone combs and items like that, which is good. Bit of blue and white there, Victorian. Another bit of 18th century pottery, more Wedgwood, black basalt. Some people confuse this with Roman. It's got engine turned decoration on it, which is quite distinctive. Lovely pottery. And nearby a pipe stem with a mark on it. It's F on one side and S on the other. If you look with the pipe bowl away from you, the Christian name is on the left hand side and the surname on the right hand side, so it's S somebody Smith, like Frederick Smith or some such. We can look it up later. Going back a bit older, there's a bit of Staffordshire slipware from about 1650 to 1750 in London. Not very thick, so this might have come from a cup or a bowl of some sort, or a dish. Beautiful pattern there, the slipware slip trailed and then combed to produce that effect. It looks a bit like a Bakewell tart. There's another bit there, that's thicker, so that would come from a large serving dish. There's always a lot of redware pottery, unglazed, on the foreshore. It's very difficult to date. It could be anything from medieval right up to early Victorian, unless it's got any decoration or diagnostic features. The ones with the grey core are likely to be older, Tudor date, because the firing wasn't done at such high temperatures, and so the clay remains grey and unfired through the core. We're near the site of Bayard's Castle and the Royal Palace now. There isn't much of a foreshore here. There's a couple of jetties here which are probably Victorian or slightly before as well. So we'll carry on looking, see what we can find. There's a small bit of Delftware there with that sort of buff coloured clay, and a tin glazed decoration with a hand painted design in blue. So this is likely to date from about 1650 to 1720 or thereabouts. There's a piece of white clay with a yellow glaze. This is fairly typical of the borderware industry, which ran from about 1500 to 1700 on the Surrey-Hampshire borders, and this is likely to be the rim of a pipkin. that sort of thing. I just noticed also another bit of decorated German stoneware, again part of a roundel off a Bartman jug, I would imagine. Just washed by the waves here. There's a nicely typical part of Tudor pottery, quite patchily glazed, redware, probably made in London. Quite a nice detail around the rim. It's a very large pot, probably a communal cooking pot or serving pot, but that's quite nice. That would date back to the time of the Tudor Palace, so we're talking 16th century there, so that's quite a nice piece. And these pieces with a red clay again, the black glaze, sort of typical products of the Staffordshire industry. Again, these run through right from about 1550, 1650, something like that. So we're in the right ballpark here. Moving on, there's a nice stoneware base. You can see the string marks on the base where, just about see it, where they were actually cut off the wheel by the potter. Just hopefully see that, yeah, there we are. So that's stoneware base of 1550 to 1650, thereabouts. A nice handle there from the side of a dish, again probably 16th, maybe early 17th century for that. Another bit of German stoneware with that tiger glaze, that salt glaze, produced that speckled effect there when salt was thrown into the kiln. That's again likely to be about 1550, 1650 from a large wine jug. A bit more Tudor pottery here, nice flanged rim, again domestic ware. Another product of the borderware industry, this time with the green glaze, again on the buff clay, 1500 to 1700. The rim of quite a nice plate or a large dish. More Delft from here. The tin glaze is very fragile, and you can see most of it is abraded off that sherd. It would have been quite nicely decorated, but sadly that's all that's left. There's the rim of a plate or a dish. Tin glaze again sort of 1750 back to about 1650. There's another tin glaze base. You can see the little sort of bubbles that have come through the glaze. That's a bit better preserved. There's only a little fragment of blue decoration on it, but it's still quite nice. I like Delft. This stuff is English stoneware or semi-stoneware, butterpot ware, or Midlands purple it's sometimes called, and these containers were used in the 18th century and maybe the late 17th century to bring butter into London from the Midlands. Another tiny bit of German stoneware. This is Westerwald. You can see purple, there's a trace of blue on it. The purple came in after about 1665, so we know that this is a late 17th century or early 18th century bit of decorated German stoneware. Okay, we're going to leave Castle Bayard and that part of the waterfront behind. Interesting, we found nothing that was attributable to the medieval period. Plenty from Tudor onwards, as you'd expect. That could just be general river rubbish. But we're heading eastwards now, and we'll see what we can pick up. Well, here is our first bit of medieval pottery. You might just be able to see the grits in the clay, which gives us a clue to its date. This is probably coarse borderware, which was produced about 1350 to 1480, and large quantities of this were shipped into London from Surrey, Hampshire borders for domestic wear, mainly jugs, cooking pots, things like that. There's a decorated Victorian pipe stem. It's got some sort of scroll, looks like GS on one side, it's a bit broken up, and a scroll on the other side, but we might be able to find out the entire pattern. There's another piece of medieval pottery. It's quite nice in that it's got a thumbed strip of decoration on it there, so that's definitely worth keeping. Probably more like to be the early medieval period, I would think. Here's a nice bigger piece of Rhineland stoneware. You can see the what they call the tiger glaze or the salt glaze, the effect there. Stoneware is very hard and is basically won't let the liquid through. It's impervious to liquids, and probably hear how hard that is. Good day for German stoneware. There's a nice little decorated piece there, which is likely to be 16th century. Nestling here in the water is another beautiful bit of German stoneware. That's very nice. That's the sort of frieze, I guess they're lions, from around the top of a 16th century German stoneware jug. That's a beautiful bit of decorated pottery there, that's lain quite happily there for nearly 500 years. A bit of slipware here. This was at the height of its popularity in the 17th century, from 1650 through to the early 1700s. It's got a bit of yellow slip trailing. It's not a very recognisable design. This was produced in London and also imported from abroad. Probably a London piece. The base of a pot. That's quite nice. There's another fragment of Delftware here. A bit more of a recognisable design, even though it's a very small piece. You see the hand painting. It was done quite quickly, so it's always quite impressionist in style, while the glaze was wet. Here's another interesting shard of 18th century ware. This is probably like the red stoneware produced by the Ehlers brothers in London and Staffordshire, with very highly detailed machine-turned decoration, teapots and mugs. So that's quite a historic piece of pottery, even though it's only I say, a couple of hundred years old. Then washing in and out of the river is a Delft rim there. You can see it's got nice orange and blue hand-painted decoration. Again, 1650, 1750, thereabouts for that piece. It's an open form, like a dish or a charger. Here's a lump of Tudor rim. It's got those thumbing marks around the edge. Vessels like this were produced at Woolwich and other places around London. A good example of the unfired core there. It's been quite poorly fired and the middle hasn't got hot enough to turn properly red. They put these thumbing marks around the edge to make it easier to lift off the fire. I mentioned earlier about how the good people of London have encroached on the foreshore over the years, the River Thames. This is Queen Hive, which is an archaeological site. Where that scaffolding would be the original level of the edge of the Saxon River, the Roman River would go right back behind that to the street. So the Roman River was much wider, much slower moving, and basically, bit by bit, mainly in medieval times, and ending up with the embankment of the river in Victorian times, the city is encroached out into the river to the place where we see it today. Down here, yet another bit of decorated stamp from a German stoneware pot, 16th or 17th century, which is quite nice. They had large roundels, sometimes with the crests of merchants or towns or royal crests on them, and that's part of one of these. Nestled away underneath this iron bolt is quite a large chunk of medieval pottery. That's a nice rim from a cooking jar. It's got a seating for a lid, so that's going to be later 15th century. You can see the green copper glaze, typical speckled medieval ware. And so this would date about 1450, 1480. And there's another little bit of medieval rim right next to it as well there. So these are nice finds from medieval London. Another small rim of a medieval pot or jug, which shows quite well the inclusions in the clay, the grits and bits of flint, sand temper as well. So that's a good way of spotting medieval pottery, just by the sort of bits that are in it. Another nice bit of medieval rim there, again with the seatings. That's later half of the 15th century. Diagnostic bits of medieval pottery. That's got a lovely green glaze there on white clay. So there's anything from 1350 to 1450, but beautiful copper glaze there. And then over here, spotted the base of a medieval jug or pot with distinctive thumbing marks, which they use to make it more stable. So that's a very obvious medieval diagnostic. Is eroding quite nicely. So fresh stuff is turning up here. I've just spotted down here a little bit of medieval jug handle in typical whiteware with slashing and stabbing, which they used on the thicker parts of clay to stop it exploding in the kiln. So again, quite diagnostic of the medieval period. Pulled out of the river below us, a nice medieval jug handle with thumbing imprints going along it there as decoration. That's quite nice. Again, that's about 1250, 1350, that sort of date. Blue and white abounds on the foreshore, late Georgian, Victorian, often with the remains of quite lovely designs on them. Met up again with another mudlarker who very kindly gave me this beautiful bit of Delft. Lovely free-drawn, free-painted design there. Again, 1650 to 1720, so if I'd found that myself, that would have been my best find of the day. But it's very generous of her to hand it on. There's an area here of nails, and you can also pick up little handmade pins from places like this, and these are the sort of areas where you're likely to find small metal finds. There's a nail there, tiny handmade pins there with little wound heads, pre-industrial revolution, and the river sorts these and you find them in the same sort of areas. I've just put on this brick a couple of minutes searching for pins. There's bits of twisted wire. These will be parts of dress accessories, especially in the Tudor period. The elaborate ruffs that people wore and the elaborate headpieces used thousands of pins. As I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted by a low battery, these date from the medieval period through the Tudor period and up to the Industrial Revolution. Handmade pins, and you can find thousands of these. They congregate in certain areas of the Thames where the river has sorted them. One small lead find just turned up. It's part of a seal, a cloth seal. I can't see any detail on it. These were in several parts and punched through the cloth to show where it had come from and what the quality was, what sort of cloth it was, and how long it was. That's part of one of those. Post-medieval. Here's an even better example of Tudor or early Stuart domestic ware, beautiful thumbing there, post-medieval red ware with a splash of glaze inside, green glaze, so quite happy to have picked that up. Another bit of Vestavalt, firmly stuck to a concretion, or bits of stuff, nail shells, all sorts of things, and a little bit of sort of encrusted ware there with surface decoration. That's going to be 18th century as well. And while I was looking at that, I happened to notice down here, still stuck in the mud, a rather lovely cameo brooch. I don't think it's very old, might even be plastic, I don't really know, but we'll wash it off when I get home and have a look at it. So that's quite an unusual find, nice bit of jewellery. I've spotted this piece of stone several times. It's been more exposed than this, it's sort of covered up and a bit muddy, but it's a massive chunk of medieval sculpted stone. You can see the tracery design, the arch on it there, hopefully from that angle. It's huge, it's far too heavy to lift. If it was smaller I might take it home. Tide's coming in rapidly and by the steps, ready to leave. Oh dear, water coming in. I thought I was going to go home without any Roman, but I've just found a tiny little bit of Roman there, colour-coated ware, so it's a slip rather than a glaze, with a bit of rouletted decoration there. So we've got back to Roman London right at the end of the day, which is always nice. I'll reach around for a bit more, see if I can find any other bits. Another little shard, which is probably Roman. It's got a rounded rim, which is generally diagnostic of Roman things. Roman greyware. Pretty certain that's Roman. So that's my second bit today.